Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the National Press Club. I'm Rick Dunham, the Washington Bureau Chief of Houston Chronicle and Hearst newspapers, and the president of the National Press Club's Eric Friedheim National Journalism Library, which is the educational and charitable arm of the National Press Club. And we're thrilled today to have with us Vanessa Fox, who is one of the nation's foremost experts on search engine optimization. Before I turn the microphone over to Vanessa, let me just tell you about a few upcoming programs that we have here. First of all, the April classes that Beth Shankle teaches in the library will be announced very soon, but there's a new one coming up on Google Documents. On May 9th, we have a program celebrating or commemorating the 50th anniversary of the famous Vast Wasteland speech of Newt Minow, former FCC chair. He will be there to talk about what's happened to the vast wasteland over the past 50 years. And he'll also have with him the current FCC chair. The session will be hosted by Frank Sesno, the former CNN Washington bureau chief. Coming up in June, we have the Reporters Boot Camp, which will teach everyone, I hope, how to do your jobs better, how to survive in this economic environment, how to find another job. Roy Peter Clark of Pointer is the keynote presenter, and we'll be announcing other panelists coming up soon. That's going to be an all-day event. And with that, let me introduce Vanessa. She has a long list of credits, and I'll try to boil it down. She previously worked at Google, and for all techies would know, built Webmaster Central on Google, www.google.com/webmasters, which provides tools, information, and community for site owners about how their sites are performing in Google search engine. She also was instrumental in the sitemaps.org alliance, which is an alliance of Google, Yahoo, and Microsoft Live Search. So that's just about all the big names there. A little bit about her. Before then, she started writing technical documentation for developers. She spent a number of years managing feature and user interface development, and she also, from those of us who are reporters, has done a lot of superb writing on technology and on search engine optimization. She uses her talents, writing, speaking, consulting, in a new venture which is called 9 by Blue. And let me pull out a paragraph which is sort of key to what we all do from her website. She writes, "Websites aren't built in isolation. They have real business value. Often they are the business. Being found in search engines isn't just something that's nice, it's vital. And search is simply one part of larger marketing development and product initiatives." And all of us in the journalism world know, or those of us who use the web, if people can't find what we did, we didn't really do it. So with that, let me turn the microphone over to Vanessa, and we're very glad to have her here. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. So something else about my background that you may not know. So when I was growing up, I really, really wanted to be a journalist. And I decided that what I really wanted to do was be an international war correspondent for Newsweek magazine, because I don't know why, but that's just what I decided I wanted to do. But I figured it would be hard to get that as an entry-level job. So I thought I would start out smaller. So when I was in high school, I did an internship at my local paper, the Bakersfield Californian. And I worked under the education editor. And so there I found that not all of journalism is like being an international war correspondent for Newsweek magazine. And in fact, what it really was going to school board meetings at like 9 o'clock at night that were really boring, and then writing them up and having the only people who read what you wrote call you the next day, yelling at you because apparently what they said in a public forum wasn't supposed to be quoted in the newspaper. And so that was sort of what I understand journalism to be. So, you know, if you kind of think about that, at least when I think about my experience there, one thing that now that I work in search just keeps coming back to me over and over, which is you know, we're all, at least I was always sort of taught to write using the, inverted sort of like pyramid style, right? And so you want to put all of your information right at the front. And if we hadn't, like, how you've all heard of this inverted pyramid thing? I didn't just make it up, yeah. So say you'd never heard of it, right? And someone came up to you and told you that you should start writing your stories this way. You might say, like, why should I write my story that way? Like, no one will read to the end of my story. We were talking before about people reading to the end of the story. Like, you might say, if I put it all there, like, I need to keep all the good information for the end because I need to make sure that people are going to read to the end, right? And then you might have, say, a discussion where you say, well, we'll do a bunch of data, right? We'll put a bunch of people in a room and we'll give one half of the room, one style of the article and the other half the other style, and we'll see if the people who get the information at the top read to the end. And you could have this debate and you could have it go on and on for a long time, right? And I'm sure that there would actually be pros and cons to both sides. But I think what that discussion fails to think about is this is the other thing that I learned at the paper. Since I was an intern, I was able to go see all the different areas. And one place they had me spend some time was where they pasted up the paper. I'm actually older than I look, so this is how they did the paper. And I was, so, I mean, you have to understand as a 16-year-old girl, and I had a piece of paper that I wrote things on, and then I had to type it up on a typewriter, right, because we didn't have computers or anything. I spent hours and hours on these school board meeting notes. I mean, I spent a lot of time. And I was shocked and appalled that when they pasted the paper and the ad was bigger than the space, they chopped off the bottom of the article, okay? I wanted to cry when I learned this. So this style of putting all of the good information at the top, it actually goes well beyond this idea of like, how are people gonna read it? It actually goes to the way the infrastructure of the paper was laid out. Like, if I put the good information at the end, chances are this ad guy, he doesn't really care about my story, right? He cares about his ad. And so I think that as, obviously things have shifted again. And so the infrastructure of how we provide information to people has shifted again. And so, we always have to think about what is that medium and what are all the different things that keep it in mind. And so this just, like I say, this was such a, like a traumatic experience for me as a high schooler that I've never forgotten it. And so it's one thing that sort of comes back to me again and again. So we'll talk about this a bit more. How many of you spent time being sad about this? Yeah, I'm not the only one. Okay. So today we're going to talk about search. There's obviously a lot of other implications in terms of the way that we've shifted to how we consume information being online, but search is definitely one of them. And I think the reason that search is so important is just that if you think about it, most people use search every day in just about everything that they do, right? Search has become ubiquitous and we don't really think about it. Like, how many of you used a search engine this week? All of us, right? But we forget about that, right? So like a couple weeks ago, I was in Australia talking to a media company that has a lot of print publications that you may have heard of in Australia. And they were talking about how proud they were of their online strategy. And, they had these websites, which are, awesome, right? I don't want to take anything away from it. But their entire strategy was, we need to get people to come to our site as a portal. Like, when they think of breaking news, we need them to type in the name of our site into, the address bar. And I told them that, I actually told their CEO this, and later I wondered if that was so wise. But I said, when I hear you talk, it sounds to me like you're still, just a print paper and trying to get people to have the paper brought to their door and wondering why, how you can increase the circulation when you think about, oh, now I need to get people to go to the homepage of my website. What you have to think about is you have to think about where people are and what they're doing. And a lot of times when there's like a breaking news information, they're going to do a search. So you have to also think about, how can I get in front of them, right, in those ways. And he told me he went home and cried. But then the next day he said that he actually liked the information, so it was all right. But so we all search all the time. Oh, apparently my slide went further. Yeah, so if you look at the types of things that we use search engines for, the one that actually scares me the most is health information. 71% of us start at a major search engine when we're looking for health information. We all know, I think at least those of us in this room, although maybe not most people that search, that the internet actually isn't 100% accurate. So, so this 71% number is a little bit scary. Um, Search continues to grow, right? As we continue to live our lives more online and really expect to be able to search for anything we want all the time, search grows. So, like, one thing people ask me a lot is, well, as social media becomes more popular and something we do more and more, does that mean we don't need to think about search anymore because people aren't searching anymore, now they're doing social media? But actually, even as social media increases, search also increases. Like, it's just, going more and more. So it's not something that we can forget about just because there's all of these other things that are happening. And this I found, this to me, I think, is just really illustrates how much we use search. So every year for the Super Bowl, because I'm super geeky, every year for the Super Bowl, I watch the ads. How many of you watch the Super Bowl and watch the commercials? Some of you? So I watch the ads. I don't watch the game. I watch the ads and then I look to see what that caused in searcher behavior and how those advertisers do in search. And so not this year, but the year before, the most popular ad was a Dockers ad where, I don't know, you may recall this, there were all these guys who weren't wearing pants walking across a field singing. It was very popular. And I don't know why. And anyway, so if you look at the day of the Super Bowl and you see what people were searching for, the most popular searches were around the Dockers ad, and two of the most popular searches were for the URL. So even when people know the domain or know the URL they're typing in, they still use search. Like, that's how much we're using search. And in fact, if you look, this was a Hitwise report that just came out this week. These are the top searches this week. The circled ones have to do with the earthquake. All the others are basically the ones that are most popular every single week. Facebook, YouTube, Facebook login, Craigslist, Facebook.com, Yahoo, eBay, www.facebook.com, Google, yahoo.com. We go to Google and search for Google. Just saying. This is your audience, by the way. Just pointing that out. So, like, I know, it's sad. So search is really just how we navigate the web. So a lot of you may have seen this State of the Media report that came out this week from the Pew Foundation, Knight Foundation, and I'm forgetting the third. Maybe someone here recalls. Anyway, it was a really interesting study, right, that came out about the media and how we interact with the media and how we use it, and there's all kinds of stuff, and it was great. I wrote a story that just talked about parts of it. I just pulled out a few parts. That's my story there. And so, one of the big things that came out of it was now, for the first time, we read news online more than we do in print. And this is some stats on how we get our news by age group, and I'm sure it's not surprising to any of you, right? The oldest age group, the radio is not in decline, but for the other age groups, if you look at the youngest, the internet, has even surpassed TV, which apparently we all love TV because that's continues to be the most. Now, this is just about how we consume information. And the thing that we're not going to really talk about today, but that is, of course, really important, and then I got into a little bit in the article, is how we consume information is not the same information that we pay for, right? It's still the case, and this is obviously another big issue, is it's still the case that when we pay for news, we pay for print, right? We don't pay for online. And so right now the print is really subsidizing online efforts. And so there's a whole lot of intricacies there, obviously. One of the things that I talk about in the article is that the biggest loss of revenue, of course, with print is with classifieds. And so that doesn't even have to do a lot with the news, right? It has to do with the fact that there's eBay and Craigslist and Monster.com and, all these other ways that people look for classified information. But of course, that's a big issue. So here, right now, we'll just talk about sort of awareness and how to get more readers, but understanding that, that's not the whole pie, obviously. But it's interesting stuff. So Hitwise last year said that news sites in particular saw a huge increase in the amount of people that were coming from search. In the book that I wrote, I used a news site as a study, but they didn't want me to say their name. But they're one of the larger news sites in the United States, and so they gave me this stat, which is that a quarter of all the traffic that goes to the site is from search engines with searches that don't include their name, don't include their brand name. And of course, if you look here at the traffic from Facebook versus the search engines, you're seeing that a lot is coming from search. This was another study that came out last year about sort of how we change, or how we've started to change consuming information. Of course, the TV. How many of you watch a lot of TV? I don't watch a lot of TV, but I think a lot of people do. Is my understanding. Local news is somewhat unaffected. Search engines, only 4% of people so far. I think that's starting to change with hyperlocal blogging, but so far most people don't use search engines for local news. But all the others, it is pretty much up. Oh, how many of you have heard of this Rupert Murdoch guy? This is such a sad picture, right, with his sad, sad face. He's so sad about search engines and Google. This is obviously from a while ago, and this had to do with the fact, right, that he wants people to pay for news. This kind of goes back to this idea of pain. I find it interesting that this sub-headline says that they see on the iPad as the potential savior, and probably he no longer thinks that with the 30% cut that Apple wants to take. But of course, I mean, when I was at Google, we talked a lot with news publishers, right, who thought that the search engines were trying to take their traffic, and really the search engines are trying to give people traffic. Like when a news site shuts off access to search engines, right, they just lose a bunch of their traffic. And of course, Murdoch was saying, if we're not there, people are just going to come to us. They're going to do a search and see that we're not there, so they're just going to come to us. Right? Well, that's a good point. But I mean, it kind of makes you think of this, right? When we got the press, it was like we've gotten, the world's done fine without it. We're not going to need it. So that's sort of one end of the equation. Another end of the equation is what's been happening with government sites. I do a lot of work with government sites. This is a Pew Internet study that came out last year that found that if you look at how people access government information, more people access it through a search engine than any other way, right? When you think about the thousands of government websites that exist, you don't think, except for the IRS, that's an exception, but when you think about things, you don't think, I'm going to go to the random.gov site. You just go to a search engine and type it. And so this is how they responded. They said we need to make our information accessible where people are instead of trying to get people to come to us. So this is sort of way on the other side of the equation, right, is figuring out how to meet people where they are. So your audience, of course, searches. So you wanted to talk about the Super Bowl. Start time.
Yes, that's supposedly how Ariana Huffington made.
Yes. Anyone here from the Huffington Post? Just wondering. No. All right, so this is showing this year's Super Bowl. This is what I don't understand. Apparently when you see a commercial, the first thing you do is do a search for it. I do not know why this is the behavior of the world, but this is the day of the Super Bowl this year, and all of the arrows are pointing to searches because that advertiser was advertising. And so here's the Chrysler stuff, kind of showing the peaks. And so this is just like, we do it, so that's just the way of the world, so let's just take advantage of it. So there was this Slate article a year or so ago, I don't know how many of you saw it, that I thought was awesome because they went into all the details of how our brains work when we search, and it stimulates the dopamine in our brains exactly like happens when we do cocaine. So apparently searching is not something we're going to stop because, why would you stop doing cocaine if it didn't have side effects, right? So basically this article, ended with, we now have these machines that allow us to seek endlessly. We're just going to keep seeking and seeking and seeking. So I say reporters understand how to write content, understand how to research. People love content and love, research. So reporters are really most poised, I think, to take advantage of search and the internet. And there's lots of reasons why that hasn't been the case historically, but it absolutely should be the case, right? Like, this is the audience, these are the readers, they're high on coke, you know, take advantage of that. All right, so the graphic we just saw here was from the trends that are available from Google every day, right? How many of you have seen Google Trends? You can see, okay. So a lot of times, if I were to say to you, you should really pay attention to that, you might say, you know, that sounds awful. You know, I'm a journalist. I don't want to be a spammer. Why would I want to pander to that? And so here's an example of what you might think. So every year, one of my things I do at the Super Bowl is look to see what happens in search results for a search for what time does the Super Bowl start. Because if you look at the trends, everyone wants to know what time the Super Bowl starts every year. Like clockwork, the morning of the Super Bowl, everyone wants to know what time it starts. So as you can see, every year, these are the headlines of my articles, and these are the links to them. Can we find out what time the Super Bowl starts? And yes, so these are the last few years. You can see specifically Super Bowl start time. What time does the Super Bowl start? So, and if you look at the search results, here's how this, I think, could be taken advantage of. The station that aired the Super Bowl, Fox, they have a bunch of information on their site about the pregame, right? They've got tons of videos, interviews with the players. That's a good audience for them. The people that want to know what time the Super Bowl starts, that's an audience they'd want on their website to take advantage of all that content. Or maybe like the NFL, or maybe the Green Bay Packers. Like, there certainly are some legitimate sites that could take advantage of this. But instead, who took advantage of this? The Huffington Post. So the Huffington Post, you've heard of this site, the Huffington Post? So they wrote an article. I will read it to you. What time does the Super Bowl start? First of all, read more. Super Bowl 2011, Super Bowl 2011 time, Super Bowl time, Super Bowl start time. What time does the Super Bowl start? More. I won't read them all. All right, here's how it goes. Are you wondering what time does the Super Bowl start? Yes, it's a common query, as in, what time is the Super Bowl 2011? Super Bowl time, Super Bowl kickoff time 2011, according to Google Trends, the evening before the Super Bowl. One might consider this journalism, I suppose. So when I say think about your audience and think about that they're searching, let's just be clear, this is not actually what I'm advocating. And so we can talk a little bit more about this and why it works for them. But like I say, and what I'm going to talk about kind of the rest of the time is how you can figure out who your audience is and what kind of language they use, and how to sort of better interact with people. It's interesting because so I wrote this article about the Super Bowl start time like I do every year. Saw that they were the ones that ranked. Although actually, if you go, you probably can't see this, but it's so bad. Like, you would want the NFL there, you'd want Fox there. They're not there. My articles are there on the first page. That's how. Well, no, that's the thing, is that I didn't write. This is what's so bad, is I didn't write the articles for that, right? I was writing the articles sort of to give a commentary. And when I realized I was ranking, I ran back to the article and put the start time as the very first sentence of the article, because I was like, I feel so bad because all these people, we got so much traffic. I understand why the Huffington Post, we got more traffic that day than we gotten for a week from people looking for that. Yes. Yes. It's right. It's terrible, right? So I've done it for the Grammys. No matter what event it is, people want to know what time it starts, and the event websites almost never take advantage of it. It's terrible. No, in fact, I turned the personalized search off. You can do a little thing at the end of the URL. Yeah, I know it's a sad state. So, so I wrote the article. Slate did an article a couple of days later that pulled this up, and apparently even the Huffington Post was embarrassed, because this is now what the article says. I just looked at it this morning. So apparently they've been shamed, although not entirely. So the thing with the Huffington Post, I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about the Huffington Post. The thing about them, right, is that they do have legitimate news articles and they have authoritative people that write for them. I feel like the Huffington Post is sort of like a split personality in multiple ways, because they've got kind of good content, they've got their political stuff, they've got their activist stuff, and they've got stuff that's unique to the site that they get big name people to write, right? They get actors and politicians and all kinds of people. And that's what gives them their authority, and that's what gives them the credibility that causes a bunch of people to link to them and think that they're a great site, right? Because they do have legitimately great content. Then they've got another section of content that's just completely scraped from other sites, right? And you hear a lot of writers sort of not sure whether to be upset or happy about it, because like they didn't ask them if they could recopy their, republish their article, but on the other hand, it gets a lot of visibility, and so people are sort of torn. And then they've got this third set of content that's like the Super Bowl stuff that's completely there for page views. And I guess it's not unlike, we've always had stuff like People Magazine and stuff, right? You've always had stuff that sort of caters to popular stuff, but it's hard to go on the Huffington Post, right? Because you're reading a serious political article, and all of the articles on the side that they're trying to get you to click on are like women's breasts and things, like, right? It's like they're really trying to go for that. So as the thing. There's been a lot of controversy with Google, right? Because the Huffington Post doesn't really stray this far, but there's all of these content farms now on the internet, I'm sure you're all familiar, that have this idea that we're just going to figure out what popular searches are and write content, which would be fine, kind of, except that they end up being like that Super Bowl article. They're just a bunch of words about a topic. They're not actually valuable information. And so Google, maybe it's been almost a month ago now, I think, recently did a huge change in their algorithm that impacted 12% of queries to try to find these pages that were about a topic but weren't actually valuable, and knocked them out. And so a lot of these content forms lost all of their rankings. Not all of them, and it's something that Google's still working on, but this strategy of just figuring out what's popular and then just writing a bunch of words about it is probably not a long-term strategy that's going to work forever, which I'm sort of happy about. I'm sure you're all happy about it, right?
Is that similar to the JCPenney situation we have in
Oh, interesting. I have a screenshot about JCPenney. I wasn't going to talk about it, but I will. Yes, it does. That's great. I think it's a couple screens down, so I'll wait until we get there. But that's a very, very good question. Okay, so let's just back up, a little bit to look at how search engines work a bit. I heard earlier, just a few minutes ago, that you all have used a search engine, so I don't need to tell you too much about them. But so I did a search for Japan, right? And we just had this big earthquake in Japan, so it's in the news. And so the thing that's interesting about this query is that normally if you would do a search for Japan when there wasn't something super newsworthy, you would just get these regular results, right? The Wikipedia results, maybe this World Fact Book. But because there's some kind of recent event, right? So Google does all this algorithmic stuff to try to figure out when someone does a search, if they're just looking for that search or if they're looking for the most recent information about a search, if it's a topical type of thing. So you can see that they've put in these news results here. And so, these come from, from Google News, and so they're only going to show these news items if it's a topical event. And so what you'll find, so if you are writing a story, when it's super topical, you'll be able to show up in the news box, and then once it just becomes kind of a regular item, then you might show up as a regular web search result. So these items, the items at the top are coming from the web index, and the items in news, right, are coming from a totally other index, right? So you actually have the opportunity to show up in both places. Just some interesting things about this. Someone earlier was asking about Twitter. If you've got all this stuff on the side, and here is this real-time. See the real-time results, right? So if you click that, you get all of the real-time stuff and all of the Twitter stuff, which I find kind of interesting. You can see the chatter and you can see the top links and the top updates. And so this, a lot of people try to optimize for real-time search. I don't think you can do that because it just scrolls. It's just real-time. I mean, you wouldn't get that many people, but I think it is more interesting just from a overall audience perspective. What are people talking about? When are they talking about it? You know, what's most interesting to them? Okay, so scrolling further down on the page, you see all this other stuff. One thing they added a few months ago is something different. We know you searched for this, but maybe what you wanted was something opposite of that. And so here they think perhaps you want more information on Australia or France. Who knows? I don't really get that. So another thing that you can get from here is the timeline search, which you again can see. You see there's all kinds of stuff here, right? Like visited, social, nearby. So again, this is interesting because this pulls back from news archives and from like books. So it goes all the way back to, in this case, the 1500s. It's not always, I don't think, super accurate that far back, but it is sort of interesting, right, that you can search not just the web, but sort of any information that Google's been able to get a hold of. And it's kind of cool, right? You can kind of scroll through and see old newspapers and stuff like that. Another thing that I find somewhat odd and bizarre, but is useful sometimes for research purposes, is the Wonder Wheel. Have you all used this? Oh yeah, so you get to it from here. So you just click the Wonder Wheel, and now, yeah, it's a side navigation. It's kind of hard to see, but at the top on the left, you can see all results, and then it says sites with images, Wonder Wheel. So you click that, and then you get to this. So what it's going to show you on the left-hand side are all the related searches, and then on the right-hand side, it's going to show you the search results for what you've clicked on. And so it just sort of lets you explore in a graphical way, although in a very poor graphical way. Like you'd think they have graphic designers at Google. It's like the ugliest graphic I've ever seen. So you can just kind of see what people are searching for. So if you click in, right, so I clicked healthcare reform. Now you can start to see all these circles and go. Another interesting thing I wanted to point out about this is I did this search for Japan, right? And then the next search that I did was for healthcare. Look at this result. Right? So they're also starting to use your entire search session to personalize your results. And so you hear a lot about how search results are personalized, and you hear a lot about how no one sees the same set of results. I work with a lot of companies that want to spend a lot of time with rankings reports. They want to know, like, what does my site rank for a bunch of queries? And I try to explain to people that at this point, there's no such thing as a ranking report because everyone sees a different set of results. And this is just one example of that it's going to use your previous searches to figure out what to show. Right, so this like Japan healthcare thing is a complete fluke. Normally, it probably would be more relevant, but this kind of thing is starting to happen more and more. That's per session. So there's a couple things that happen on a session basis. You'll see searches like that, and then on just so if you're logged in, it'll use your search history, and it'll also use your web history if you use Chrome or have the toolbar installed. So even if you got to a site not from search, but you just went to it on your own, it'll keep track of that. That's not going to be as obvious as the search session, but it's going to be like if you go to certain sites a lot, it may show them more often, that kind of thing. Then if you're not logged in, it's going to use the history of that machine. And this is a big problem for libraries, for instance, because people are doing all kinds of searches. But really, I mean, the goal is that Google and Bing has started to do this to some extent as well, is trying to somehow show you the most relevant results for you, right? And so they're going to do anything that they can to try to make that possible. All right, so we're still on the same page. We've just scrolled down a little bit. So you can see there that's popping in some videos. And again, this isn't, so you've got your regular web search results and then all these other things get stuck in. So like if you for instance, are a news organization, you could rank, the article could rank as a page, but then the news result could rank. You could have a video result rank. You could have an image result rank because they're all sort of there separately. So videos, these happen to be YouTube videos. They actually are showing more than YouTube videos now. For a while, people didn't think that they were. But of course, here you can see this one's from CBS, and the other one is from, is that Al Jazeera? I can't see that far. But yeah, so like it's generally a good idea to have, like a channel and put your videos there, particularly since YouTube is now the #2 search engine in the United States. So a lot of people are just searching YouTube directly. So it's always a good idea to have a channel there and put your videos there, and then just have links, back to your story. And you could even put ads, right, in the videos now. So if you want to make money from the videos. The next set of results we're seeing comes from the map. So again, if you have anything, yeah.
Does it give just as much ranking or credibility to a video on YouTube from CBS as it does to a video from a high school kid from Nebraska?
Well, so what it does, it's possible, because you've seen these videos go viral, right? It looks at page views, the number of comments. It looks at sort of all the engagement metrics for that video. So it probably is the case that, say, like the CBS is going to have more engagement overall, so they're going to be showing a lot. But it's not because it's CBS, right? It's just it just has to do with all of those engagement metrics, how often it's shared, all that kind of thing. Although they probably would know if you sat at home and watched the video like 1,000 times. That probably wouldn't work. All right, so maps. So these images are coming from people uploading, these pictures to maps. So that's another avenue. And then, of course, images we have down here is coming from image search. So there's all kinds of stuff now, right, that's going on just beyond the regular web search results. And if you're in media, depending on what kind of media you're in, you might be able to get involved in all these different channels. JCPenney. All right. So how many of you have heard this JCPenney story? Yeah, so some people, so people know it can be important to rank well in search engines, and so the way that I tell people to go about that is to, find out what your audience is interested in, make sure you're solving their problems, make sure you're engaging with people, all this boring stuff that might take a long time. So some people say, well, I don't want to do that. That seems really hard. Instead, let's figure out what are these algorithmic factors that Google uses to rank sites, and let's just go get those in some other way. And so one of those things obviously is links, right? If you have good quality content and people really like you, they're going to link to your pages. And so that's seen as a signal that your stuff is good. So some people go, well, yeah, it seems really hard to get people to, do marketing and raise awareness and write good content. And instead, we're just going to go buy a bunch of links. We're going to go find a link network that knows a bunch of bloggers, that maybe some guy has a bunch of websites that are abandoned and no one goes to anymore, and he's bought them all, so now he has 1 million sites that are just abandoned sites, and we'll just put a bunch of links on them all and get paid for them, so that to the search engines it looks like this site's really popular and has a bunch of links going to it. So this is what happened with JCPenney. JCPenney says it was not them, but perhaps their SEO firm that did it. Someone used these paid link networks to get a whole bunch of links going into a bunch of JCPenney pages with anchor text. So that's like the text that's in the link itself that points to the page. Comforter sets, dresses, curtains, anything that they sell. There were thousands of pages from these abandoned sites just pointing in, how did that happen? Well, it turns out it was this paid link network. So the New York Times ran an expose about this. I actually talked to the reporter as he was writing the story. And then he and I were on NPR together. It was a beautiful friendship. So they talked with Google when they wrote the story and said, hey, what's up with this? Is this cool? And Google was like, no, that's not cool. And they took all the JCPenney, all the pages out of their search index. So the pages all ranked #1 for thousands of queries, and now they rank 68 or 70, basically so that no one's going to see them. Because that's what they do, right? If the search engines find that you're manipulating their search results, then they're just going to blow you. So that's what happened with JCPenney. And so that became a pretty visible story. And so then, of course, it came to light that a lot of sites are doing this. And because it was a hot story, you know how it is, right? A story gets hot, then everyone kind of wants to do something on that. I got a lot of calls from reporters that week. And so people started outing other sites. So like Overstock.com got outed that week. Forbes got outed that week. Forbes was selling links, not buying them. To be fair to Forbes, this is something that had been going on with Forbes for several years, and they'd already gotten caught, and they were trying to clean it up when it became public again. And they actually outed themselves. They were like, "We thought we got rid of all these. Where are they at? Would someone help us?" And so we were like, "Here they are." So, this is the thing, right, is that people, once they start to think, oh, search is important, they kind of veer off into these get-rich sort of quick schemes, right, instead of the real way to do it. Yeah.
This is not SEO, but I've heard that on the other side, on the paid side,
Oh, yeah.
that they will actually set something up to click the hell out of their competitors.
Click fraud.
Yeah, so that they blow their budget.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's click fraud. So, yeah, because what happens is all that's on an auction basis, right? So you say, I'll pay up to, $1 for each click, and I have $1 million budget, let's say. So once that's gone, you're not going to show up anymore, right? Because you've gone through your budget. Google has a lot of things in place to try to catch that, because obviously that's a big concern, and all of the ad networks do. They check all kinds of things. Like, for instance, if you were to do it, they'd be able to tell, right? Because your IP address would be the same. And in fact, if you accidentally do, like a double click, which happens all the time, they won't count that. Like, that kind of stuff is easy for them to tell. When it does happen, like, someone might hire a botnet, right? That's infected 1,000 machines. And then that's all over the place. Like, occasionally that stuff gets through, but they generally do figure it out, and then they credit the advertiser back. Like, it's a big focus for them. But yeah, certainly it's happening. Yeah. Yep. The underworld of the internet. The dark side, right? All right, so JCPenney. So I used this one just because I knew that we'd be able to see a lot of the sort of new things that are going on in search. So the first one on the left is regular web search results. So when this is a spiking news story, like the day it broke, the news results would have been at the top. But since this was now like a month and a half ago, it's not as topical a story, so the news results have started to go down a little bit. You also see that this is my story. But this is the New York Times story. The guy that broke the story is the third result. And you see that the reason I'm seeing it is that someone I know shared it on a social network. So this is part of how social media and search really start to interact. Bing and Google both have really started to escalate their efforts in trying to use social media as a signal, right? You just heard about how links now is starting to be gamed. And so as the web evolves, they're trying to figure out new ways to be able to figure out value signals. So one of them is sharing on social media. So for instance, if you're a news organization or a journalist and you are able to cultivate social media following, and the people that follow you share your stories, and then the people that follow them share their stories, that's sort of a cascading effect. And then that means, because of this personalized search, anyone who searches who is on a network with any of those people will see your story, whereas otherwise it might not have ranked at all. So it's not that it has a higher validity, it's just that it's one of the signals that gets thrown into the mix. So, who knows exactly how they go about it, but basically if you and I are on a social network and I share a story, you're likely to see that story if you do a search that's related to it, whereas otherwise that might not have shown up for you. And right now they might show just a couple of results that are there because of that, like maybe 8 of the results might have nothing to do with social, and the other 2 might be social related.
That's why the whole Facebook thing is be the first in your network to like it.
Yeah. Right. So with Bing, they use liking. With Google, they don't use liking yet because they don't have a Facebook integration. But yeah, it's very similar. Yeah.
And if you're a news organization, you would want your stories to be on Facebook and LinkedIn as well as on your own
For sure. Well, with those, you don't have to republish it. You can just do a share or whatever, you know, each of them have their own name for it, but you basically share the story to the social network and it'll show like the headline and then a blurb and then other people can like it. And what you really want to do is put like buttons, or I think they changed the name. They keep changing the names of these things, but you want to put the share and like buttons on the tops of your stories. Because also people are really, really lazy. I don't know if you knew this, but I have noticed it myself that I am lazy. So if I like a story, as in I enjoy it, not as in I've done a Facebook thing, but say I read a story, I might want to share that. But if I have to copy and paste the URL somewhere, I probably won't do it. But if all I have to do is click a button, then I might do it.
You might be coming to this later. The two blogs I do have, they're WordPress blogs. Is there a way to add a like button?
Yes.
Like the Washington Post. And
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Normally there's plugins for WordPress that'll do all that stuff for you. Yeah. Yeah. So you should.
Check the plugin.
Yeah, you should definitely do that. Yeah, it's all good stuff. So yeah, so there you see, so that's there because of liking. Then you see the news result. This one on the right is Google News. So the thing, of course, that is different with Google News compared to web is that it is only topical, right? So the New York Times story, even though they were the one that broke the story, they're not showing up at all because it's like a month old. So their story has fallen out of Google News. And here you can see the Overstock story, because probably it was mentioned, you know, the JCPenney story was mentioned with Overstock probably. Yeah, interesting stuff. All right, so this is how we look at search results. The one on the left is Google and the one on the right is Bing. And the red, so this is a heat map, right, of where our eyes look when we look at search results. So the red would be more people looked at it, and the yellow would be less people, and then the white, nobody saw it at all. So the point of this is twofold. One is that everyone looks at the organic search results, the normal search results, and not as many people look at the ads, right? Which I guess would be somewhat expected. But the other thing to keep in mind, and this goes to how you write your titles, is that everyone scans down the left-hand side of the page. And if you're able to somehow, this is hard, but if you're able to step outside yourself when you do a search, you'll notice that this is what you do. If you think about it too much, you won't, right? Because you'll be thinking about it, but we don't read all the way across, right? We don't read and then read. We just sort of scan down and we find something that kind of matches, and then we'll read across. So the other thing that we do is that we evaluate things in clusters of like 3 or 4. And so there's a couple things going on. One is that we don't read the results. We're kind of on autopilot. So what our brain will do is try to find a pattern match with the letters we've typed in. So the actual sort of characters, right, the way that they look, we try to find a pattern match kind of behind the scenes, and we kind of scan it, and then when we see something that matches, then we'll sort of read all the way across. And so we do that in those clusters of 3 or 4. And so as long as you're sort of in the cluster, you're probably going to be looked at. But then the other thing is that your title has to include the words that were in that search, since people aren't really reading. And you know, the search engines bold those words too, which kind of reinforces it. So what does that mean? That means this. Use the language of your audience. And I don't think this is the same as pandering. This is just sort of understanding how people talk. So, of course, one thing that you can do, although I just said not to with the Huffington Post example, is you can look at the trends. So like right now, a lot of people are interested in radiation exposure. So if you're doing a story about radiation exposure, those would probably be the words to include in your headline, right, versus some other variation. You can sort of click in, right, to see the variations of how people are searching for it, effects of radiation, radiation sickness, but like you probably want to try to use those words. And here you can see, because this is a topical search, we've got news and video that's coming in. This is something I did last year. You know, we had the healthcare bill debates. I was actually out of the country at the time, but you know, there was a lot of people sort of interested in it. So you can see the search spike. I think the Sunday when they were doing all the debating when they passed the bill. So a lot of people were searching for it. So this is what I did. So this is Insights. How many of you used Google Insights for search? So it's pretty cool. So you can type in a variety of searches to kind of see how people are searching for things. I did healthcare bill, healthcare reform and HR 4872, which you may know as the reconciliation and reform. I can't even remember the name of it, but basically it's the healthcare bill. So the red and blue lines are healthcare bill and healthcare reform. The line at the bottom that's goes across at the 0 is HR 4872, because how many people honestly are going to search for that? Well, you can't really see this very well, but Congress, it's not even the right bill number. They title all their titles with the number of the bill. That's how they title them, right? So if you're scanning down this page, you're likely to skip that, even though it ranks really well, because it doesn't match what you're looking for. Who does the best here is Open Congress, right? Because what they did is they have the name of the bill as people refer to it, as well as the number of the bill and the title of the bill. So it's not that they ignore the official name or ignore the number. They just make sure that what's on the far left-hand side, which is the area that we're skimming, is the words that people use, and then we include, you know, the other stuff to the end. Then who else did well there was CBS News. They also did that. So Open Congress, you can see that most of the traffic they get is from search, and that's why for every single bill, because that's kind of their thing, right, is they want to, you know, just publish the text of bills. For every bill, they go and look at search, they see how people refer to it, and then they just adjust their titles accordingly so that they include all three of those things. And it works really, really well for them. So, you know, headlines have always been important. But, you know, back, you know, when I was an intern and at the newspaper, you know, we figured like people got the paper and they kind of, you know, skimmed the paper while they were reading their coffee. So they read the headline, and then if that was interesting, they might read a little bit of the story and see if they wanted to read more. But now online, right, all people are really looking at is the headlines, right? They're just sort of scanning them. So I live in Seattle, and we have a viaduct that they're always saying they're going to tear down because it's really unsafe, and then every time there's an earthquake anywhere, it becomes a big issue again because it's going to fall down. So look at these headlines and tell me which is the worst one. That's a good question. What does that mean? So if you think about those heat maps, right, if I'm scanning this page to see what I want to read, I'm going to skip right over not an exercise in futility, right, because it just makes no sense to me. I'm sure it makes sense when you read the whole story, and it may make sense on the page, but since most people are coming from search, like this one is kind of okay because it has the tunnel in the name. I can see they're trying to be kind of clever, but it also sort of misses the mark a little bit. I think there are ways to be sort of interesting and clever in your headline while also letting people know what it's about. I think it just takes skill and talent, which I'm sure you all have.
You're saying then that really, or ideally, the keywords of the story, whatever, should be in the first 3 to 4 to 5.
Ideally, right, ideally. I mean, you obviously don't want to make things be artificial.
We need to rewrite the headline for the web.
Yes, think of the inverted pyramid. Yeah. And I think it's not writing for search engines, it's writing for the web. I think it's exactly what you're saying, because it's not just for search engines, it's because that's how people are interacting. It's also the case that it's a really strong signal to search engines, so from a purely algorithmic perspective, it can help you rank better, but that's not the only reason to do it. I think it's also the way that we as people are just interacting. And it's not just in search, it's like, if they're using an RSS reader, or even if they go to your site and are scanning the page, it really is just the case now that when we read online, we're just scanning that way. And so, like I say, you don't want to go overboard where it's completely, you know, artificial. You don't want to become the Huffington Post. I'm sure you're not listening, Huffington Post. But yeah, I mean, you know, kind of, it's a good thing to keep in mind. You mean like tags, kind of like we saw with the Huffington Post where they had all those tags there? Oh, yes. So that's actually a really, really good point. This here is actually coming from the title tag of the page, not from the headline. Generally, those will be the same, but they don't have to be the same. So with WordPress, for instance, you can generally get a plugin that lets you put a different title for the page than a heading. So you can absolutely do that if you want the title to be a little bit more scannable in these types of situations, and then you want the headline to be a little bit more interesting. You probably want them to be somewhat similar because, like I say, sometimes people will actually be on the page and then at that point they'll see the headline and they're going to interact the same way. But you do have a little bit more flexibility there if you do it that way. The other thing is that, not with Google News, but with search results, let's find a good one. That description underneath normally comes from the meta description of the page, which is another sort of hidden field. And again, with the content management system, you normally can specify it.
That meta thing, that would be the tags listing on WordPress.
Well, so there's two things. One is the keywords meta tag, and the other is the meta description. The keywords meta tag isn't used by search engines, so people spend a lot of time on it, and they really don't need to. The meta description, which is actually a paragraph, it's used by search engines only for display. A lot of people will stuff a bunch of keywords in there because they think it's used for indexing for relevance, but it's actually not. It's really, you want that to be a compelling message that really lets the reader know what the story is about, because that's what they're going to be evaluating whether or not to click through or not. So you want it to be like as as catchy and as engaging as possible.
Now, is the meta description, is that separate, say, from your regular, doing a regular news lead, you pretty well describe what you do.
Yeah, so like what we'll do a lot of times is have it be the same as the lead. You just want it to be short. Like sometimes your lead might be a little bit longer, and so you'd have the part of the meta description just be truncated a little bit.
Again, with WordPress, and I assume this might be true of other blogging applications, is there a plugin, a separate one for meta description?
Yeah, so there's a couple plugins that you can get that just make the box easier to get to and let you, put stuff in there. Yep.
Or we had an example of a story recently that the lead that was, so we picked up the first graph and the first graph dropped into the meta description. And that's great. But the second graph was a 4-word sentence, and that was key. You needed
Yeah.
that as part
And
of
so
the
you
lead.
put that in there.
If you didn't pick that
Yeah.
up also and put that in there, it's like, well, why
Made no
did the
sense.
story make it,
Right.
make it different, so.
Yeah, so that's why it can be helpful to do that.
Can you spend a little time though? There is some value to standing out though, like to being the odd duckling, right? Like, I mean, completely what you're saying about organizing the title,
Yes.
big words, but if you go back to the example you were using, and maybe it's because you prompted it, but everyone was wondering about non-exercising goods.
No one would click on it. So yes, it's good to stand out, but stand out in somewhat of a descriptive way where people know something about what they're getting. The thing that you find in search is there's two different ways that people search. One is sort of a task-based, I want the answer to something. The other is sort of more of a browse. I'm interested in just seeing what's going on. You do have some percentage of those people. That would be more the example of someone who's reading the paper. But most people, particularly from search and RSS and social media, are just looking to accomplish their task and solve a problem, and anything that's extraneous to that, they block out. So if you're able to somehow stand out, I mean, absolutely, but if you can do it in such a way that it's still obvious what it's about, because otherwise you're going to just lose a lot of click-through.
You could say maybe to like Seattle Live is an exercising facility.
Right, like you could start it with that. Yeah, I mean, there's, you have to be kind of creative, but there's certainly, I think, things that you can do.
I definitely, looking at usability designers, like the more you mimic everybody else, in a sense, the less you stand out.
Right, but also, I know, and it's a fine line, it's really a balance, because if you get too far away from how everyone does things, the usability suffers, because we love habits, right? I mean, we're just a habit, animal, right? And so this used to come up a lot. So I used to be a technical writer like years ago, like in the early 90s, and Microsoft basically set the standards. However Microsoft called things in their like UIs, we had to call it in our stuff. And we hated it because sometimes it was like, well, that's really stupid. But at that point, everyone used Windows, right? And so if we used a completely new paradigm for the UI, like no one knew how to use it and everyone was upset, And so but there's kind of a fine line, I think, where you want to you don't want to go too far astray, but you do want to be individual and innovative, for sure. Yeah. All right. Oh, I'm going way too far ahead. All right. So my secrets of search. What? Okay. Yeah, I don't have a watch and my phone died, and like, how do you know what time it is without a phone? It's crazy. I have one at home. Search Google, right? So this is what I do. So I was in Australia a couple weeks ago, right, where the time is in Australia is just, it makes no sense. It's 19 hours ahead, so it's not even like a different time, but the day is totally different. So I was completely screwed up. But I had to go to all these things. I had to do all these like events and stuff, and so I would never know what time it was. And you're really like stressed out when you have a bunch of things you have to do and you don't know what time it is. So I would just go to Google and say, what time is it in Sydney? And it has a little one box that pops up and tells you exactly what time it is. I loved that thing. I used it all the time. All right, so I like to tell people to solve the searcher's problem, right? So you're trying to engage with, with your readers, and you want to rank well in search engines, but you also want people to click on your results. And so people are always asking me about all the different algorithmic factors, and I think it really just boils down to that, is right, solve the person's problem. Because then you're going to be relevant for the searches, you're going to get engagement, you're going to get shared, like all that stuff tends to come. It doesn't come as easily without this first thing. So this is an example that I've used for a long time because I just think it really illustrates well. There's a few things going on here. One is that it's getting better, as you can see, but it used to be that we talked about global warming, right? And then it was sort of like, well, it's not really global warming, it's climate change. So people started to change their terminology, but the mass audience didn't, right? They're much farther behind. And so the blue line is people searching for global warming, the red line is people searching for climate change. People who only use the term climate change and didn't include global warming lost a lot of searchers. And I think this is the example, kind of like the healthcare bill, where there are ways to use the proper terminology and the terminology that searchers use. So this is sort of the first part of the problem, right? Which is, how do people refer to things? I was just at a conference last week where someone used the example of Gaddafi, where like there's over 100 ways that the news media spells his name. But if you look at search, like almost everyone searches for his name in the same way. It's like the news media could just sort of, yeah, right. But it's that kind of thing, right? So here's the first thing, right? So whatever it is that you're talking about, how do people talk about it? It's not only good for search, which of course it is, because if you use a term that only 5% of the people search for, you're going to lose that 95%, right? And you want more readers. But also, you engage with people better, right? If you use their language, it resonates with them better, and it's just good all around. So the next thing, again, this is from Google Insights for Search, which is google.com/insights/search. It'll tell you all of the related things that people are searching for. So again, if you're doing some kind of a story, you can really figure out, what angles should I explore? What kinds of answers are people really looking for? What are the issues that they care about the most? So this is for global warming and for climate change. You can see that people are looking for, facts, effects, causes. This is google.com/insights/search. Yeah. And it's really cool. You can I didn't show it here, but you can look all over the world. You can look at a country, you can look at a metro area, a city, a state, like it's really cool. So then the next tool that you can use, so that kind of gives you a high level, right? If you really want to get granular, yeah.
Now, can we go and address that one question?
Yeah.
Gaddafi,
right.
Do you throw in at the end of the story the 5 different alternate spellings so that you catch all the
I don't think that you need to do that. For one thing, you're going to get most people. The search engines also are starting to do a better job with the synonyms. So it's starting to be, this is particularly true with misspellings. You'll find that a lot of people will put a bunch of spellings at the end. The search engines now do a great job with misspelling. So if someone types it in wrong, they'll show the right thing. But yeah, I don't think that you really need to do that. Yeah. Yeah, in that case, I think you'd want to find a way to use both.
The word,
Like with the healthcare bill example.
the word, both
Yeah.
healthcare reform and healthcare bill in your.
Yeah.
With that climate change thing, for instance, I've read some stuff about it. Sometimes I'd say scientists, climate scientists like to talk about climate change instead of global warming because
Yeah.
the effects go far beyond warming.
There you
So
go.
a sentence like that in the
You've
story-
educated people.
Yeah, but that would also
Yeah.
catch searches.
Well, that's the thing. You've managed to do it in a way that's actually useful,
Yeah.
which is see you are clever.
I was just trying to be accurate.
Yeah, right, for sure. All right, so yeah, so you know the trend stuff which we looked at first, right, just gives you high level. Here's the very most popular things people are searching for right now. So that's going to help you with like earthquake stuff, right, like really big stuff. Then you have insights, which let you search for anything, and then it's going to tell you for that anything that you search for kind of the top related things. If you want to go even more granular, you can use the Google AdWords reporting stuff, and you don't need an AdWords account. So even though it's called AdWords, you don't actually have to use AdWords to use it. I would just Google AdWords tool or Google AdWords keyword because the URL can be complicated. That actually redirects somewhere else. Anyway, what that will tell you is all of the searches that people do that are related and the number of searches done per month. And you can do this on a global level or on a country level, and you can sort it by volume. So what this is going to tell you, I did this for global warming. So here you can see this is specifically the searches that people do around that, and this is exactly how many times that's been searched for over the course of a month. So what this is great for is if I were to say I were NOAA, right, the National Atmospheric and Oceanographic, I might have gotten that flipped. Them, yes. If I were that site, hello if you're listening, and I wanted to build a site about global warming, I might go here and I might say, I'm going to have a page of questions. I'm going to answer a bunch of questions. I'm going to make sure these are all the questions that get answered. I might have other things I also want to have answered, but I want to make sure that we at least answer these questions because this is what people really want. You guys can tell what's coming next, right? So this is the page that they have, right? I'm sure these are great questions, and I'm sure they have great answers, but they do not in any way match the kinds of questions that people are searching for, right? So if they are wondering, why do I not get very many people from search? This may be why, right? So solve people's problems. It's a great thing. This is an example that I did for the Department of Education, which is that how are people searching for money for college or financial aid. So here again, you can see that most people are searching for financial aid, and then you can see kind of more specifically. And then this is another tool that you can use to find out the kinds of questions that people are asking about a topic. And April 13th, I think it is. April 13th, we're going to do another session specifically on how to use all of the keyword research and all of the tools that are available. Because there's a lot that can be here, right? And there's a lot that you can mine and a lot of ways that you can use the data. Like we were saying earlier, you don't always have to stand out in front of the grocery store anymore and ask people questions. So yeah, you start to dive in, right? And so then you can really just start to get a sense of what people are most interested in. Any questions about all of that? Yeah.
You said at the very beginning you talked to the publisher in Australia, so the goal should not be, if you're running XYZ newspaper, it should not be to get people to log on to your site. It should get them to find your site.
Well, you want to show up in search, right? They were saying that for breaking news, I mean, it's a good goal. It's not that they shouldn't have this as a goal, right? But they were saying that their only goal was that when people think of breaking news, that they go to that website to see what the breaking news is. And I just said that that's great to have as a goal, but that they should also have an alternate goal, which is that when people search for breaking news, that they have their videos and their news articles and all that stuff also showing up in search, right? So that they're thinking about the searcher as well. And they actually said they were a little bit like Murdoch in that they were sort of actively not wanting to do that because they were like, well, if people go to we want people to go to our site. We don't want them to go to search. And I was like, well, they're going to search anyway. Like, you're not going to get them to stop searching. So you may as well you may as well take advantage of those people. You had a question?
Well, I think you might have said this. That I think personally, the search would lead to the trust that would, like,
Yes. That's absolutely the case. And I think the more searchers see a site in search results, the more that sort of gets supported, right? And it becomes more of a credible source.
Right, but like if I want to find something, somebody says, "Do you read that article in the New York Times?" I don't usually think of going to the New York Times website.
Right,
I think of going to Google,
right.
especially if it's paid content and I can get it for free.
Yes. They don't want you to do that, but but that's right. But that's right. Yeah. And but the thing is that in that case, you probably would, if you didn't have a way to get there, you probably wouldn't go there. It's not the fact that it's in the search engines means that you're not paying something you would otherwise pay.
No, my point was more that
Yeah.
if I know it's the New York Times, I still go to Google.
Yeah. Yes. And that kind of goes back to the earlier example where like people are searching even when they know the URL. Like search is just how we navigate things. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there maybe some kind of uncertainty principle here where if we do a perfect job of attracting not only return readers but grabbing people from search
Yeah.
to come to our content, that we then inflate our numbers about maybe bounce rates or how well we're retaining that audience, and maybe we're, you know, do we then lose sight necessarily of how many of our audiences are necessarily engaged with our content in particular?
Well, so it's interesting because this was actually an issue that this Australian company brought up, that they said that they wanted return visitors. And so that the people who came from search engines, they actually didn't value as highly as their return, visitors. And I said, well, kind of to your point, a lot of people who come from search are your return visitors. It's just that they've been to your site before, they're going to do a search. If they see you in the search results again, they go, oh yeah, I've been to that site before, I like that site, and they go there again. And so it's not that the searcher and the return, visitor are not the same thing. I mean, you can use your analytics, right, to parse that out so that you still can tell who your return, visitors are, whether they came as direct or they came from a search engine. So it's just a matter of setting up your, analytics properly to do that. Yes.
Google, Bing, Yahoo, the principles that you're talking about, do they work pretty much on all those things?
Yeah, so the kinds of principles that I tend to talk about work the same across search engines. Yahoo, of course, uses Bing's results now, so they're exactly the same. I wasn't going to bring that up, but actually the misspelling thing, that's actually where the crux of that issue is Google did a good job of figuring out an algorithm to tell when people were misspelling things, and that's the biggest advantage that Bing has gotten by looking at the click stream, is that they don't have to do their own, I'm sorry, Bing, if you're listening, they don't have to do as much with the spelling algorithms because they can just see which results are returned in Google for misspellings, and they can just use that as a spelling correction. So, yeah. You guys, I'm sure all saw that on the Colbert Report. We broke that story on Search Engine Land. Yeah. You had a question.
What's the total flip side of this in getting rid of content where you don't want people to go to a certain site that gets a lot of...
So you have a site that you own, and you don't want it to show up in search? Is that what you're saying?
Well, content.
Oh, you're saying a competitor? You want...
No, I'm just saying how do you get rid of...
But so it's not a site that you own, though? Okay. Because if you own the site, right, you can use like robots, like the text file to block. So if it's not, there's sort of a few different things that are going on. If it's not a site that you own, but you're able to get the content removed, which it sounds like is not the case. But this does happen occasionally. Someone will accidentally like publish your social security number or something. Or maybe you post a comment and later you think better of posting that comment publicly and you ask the site to take it down, but it's still showing up in Google, right? In those types of situations, if the site takes it down, then you can go to Google, you can just do a search for the URL removal tool, which I actually built at Google as well, and you can just request it be removed, but that's only going to work if you've already worked with the website to get the content removed. But that works for that situation. If it's the case where the thing that I see have happen a lot is another site talks badly about you or your company, and you're like, I don't like that, it's a lie or whatever, people will try to call the search engines all the time, right, and say this is a lie, they should have to take it down. But of course the search engine is just an index of the web, and so they can't take that information down. And so the two things you can do there, one of course is sue them if it's actually a legal case, and then the search engines will take it down. The other thing though that you can do is just make sure there's a lot of positive content about you that pushes the negative result down. And that's what a lot of people end up having to do. So I'm not sure which of those was your question, but I think that covers most situations. Yeah. Any other questions about that or anything else?
Well, I was just going to point out, depending on what the purpose is, like if you're a small business, sometimes it's good to have a negative comment or two. It doesn't look fake that way.
It is actually. Studies have found that if it's all positive, people don't really trust it. Yeah, all negative. That's not as good.
But if there's, so, and then I know of a situation where a local business actually got a really scathing negative review, but then actually it provoked more positive.
Yeah.
reviews.
Oh, and that's the other thing that happens. Yeah, for people that do like you, it causes them to post more good things about you, which of course looks better than you posting good things about yourself. I mean, unless it's like, your brother. And yeah.
As obviously reticent as Google has always been to reveal the algorithm. And I know you probably
That was a good voice.
sick of hearing about it. But there's an article of Faith, and of course I mistrust articles of Faith, which is why I'm asking.
Yeah.
There's an article of Faith that says, if other sites are linking to you, that is a good thing for the search result. In other words, more sites link to you,
Yeah.
and people follow the link, that's going to help your position in a search.
Generally true, although, so that was sort of the basis of PageRank, which was what Google was sort of founded on. If you read the original patent for PageRank, it's kind of like that. It goes a little bit beyond that into saying what also matters is the relevance of the page. If a site about one thing links to a site about something else, that won't be seen as a strong signal as a site that is about the same thing. Another thing that goes into it is authority. So a site that has a lot of links on its own that links, that's going to be seen as more valuable than a site with no links at all that no one's ever heard of that links. So there's a few additional things that go into it. But sort of at a basic level, that is the case, that if a bunch of pages are linking to a site, that's seen as, oh, people are seeing this as valuable. Now, this became a controversy. This was also in the New York Times. You may have seen this, where a guy that sold glasses online wanted to rank really well for every variation of different like brand names of glasses. So his strategy, that's what he thought. He was like, well, any link is a good link. So he purposely made his customers mad and provided very, very poor service, like terrible service. Like he'd yell at people and hang up on them and not send their glasses. Like he did as much as he could because he wanted people to go to the review sites, leave a bad review for him and link to him. So he thought, if I just get a bunch of links, I'll rank really well and I'll get a bunch of people to buy my glasses. I won't send them the glasses and then they'll leave me a bad review and it'll be great. So this came out and, it was like, hey, is this the case? So, Google came out and said, no, actually our algorithms are more sophisticated now. And in fact, because of this story, we've gone back to tweak them a bit more so that we're trying to do some analysis of sentiment where negative links aren't going to be seen as highly. And then, of course, the very wonderful ending to the story is that he appeared in the New York Times yet again, being led away in handcuffs because he was then arrested for defrauding his customers. And he was on record as saying that he did it in the New York Times. So, yeah. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. I don't know if you are going to get to them.
Probably not, so I will go get.
Ask the flip side of each other. One is, as I'm writing my stories for the web, what kind of hyperlinks would drive traffic to me? Does it make a difference if I have hyperlinks within my own story?
Good question.
And then what kinds, if so?
Yes.
Then the flip side is, as a reporter, I'm looking to try to get information, the latest stories on my members of Congress for my home area. I did a search today. Sheila Jackson Lee is one of the congresswomen often searched. But I didn't find news stories on her. It was way down past the first page before we got to news about.
She probably wasn't in the news lately.
Recent, but one of my interns has the Google News alerts set up, and they would get yesterday, today.
Yes.
That she's mentioned. So what do I need to
Yes.
do to find the latest news that would have happened today for any of the
Yes.
people that I'm covering?
So for your first question, which was about linking, the first thing that might be interesting that's somewhat related to your question is that I talk to a lot of journalists that don't want to link out of their site to other sites because they think they lose page rank, right? So you accrue page rank by sites linking into you. So people sort of take that the next logical step to say, well, okay, I have 100 sites linking to me, so I have this page rank based on 100 sites. If I link out then to 100 sites, I lose all of that page rank. But that's not actually how it works. So it's actually great to link out to other sites. That actually helps the search engines get even more information about your site, because then it becomes part of a neighborhood, right? Because that's sort of the natural way that the web works, is through a linking structure. So who you link out to and the text that you use to link out to will actually help you. So please do that. The other thing is linking to yourself. This can be great because not only do links help you, but the anchor text, so the text that's in the link pointing to you, is used to figure out how that link is going to help you. So if someone is linking to your story with the word Obama, it's going to help you rank for Obama. If someone links to, say with Clinton, it's going to help you rank for Clinton. So it matters what that text is. So you can't control how other people link to you. For instance, Adobe Reader ranks #1 for click here. Right? So there's not much you can do. But what you can have control over is how you link to your own site. So you just want to make sure that when you're linking to other stories that you've written, that the text that you use when you link is the descriptive text that you would want to rank for. You want it to be as descriptive of that site as possible. Now, to your second question, this kind of goes back to what I was saying before about how the search engines try to figure out the topical nature of a query. So if there's a big spike in search interest for something, then that means it's probably topical, and that's when that news box is going to show up. So for the example that you give, there's probably just not a lot of people searching at that time for some news event. So if you want to find the latest news stories, you'll have to go to Google News, and that's going to show you. You can't do a Google web search in that case because the news just isn't going to be spiking enough to pop up in regular web search. Yeah. And again, you'd have to get a botnet and get a bunch of people to search for that, and then I don't recommend that.
So is a Google News alert or
that just means it shows up in Google News.
But I'm saying, is it best to get that for, say, every member you're going to be covering, so that any
Sure. Yeah, for sure. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's really the best way to kind of stay up to, because that way you're going to get any kind of news alert, even if it's kind of a small news item that you wouldn't ever see in regular search results. So that's great. Yeah, for sure.
On the linking to your own site, so
Yeah.
then, if you want to link to previous stories of yours,
Yeah.
instead of saying something like, to see what we wrote last year, click here, you should say, have the link on see what we wrote here.
Well, no, what you'd want to change that to say, to see what we wrote on global warming
Yeah,
last
right.
year, click here, and you'd want to link.
You know, that was a good example, but
Yeah.
you get the keyword in.
Yes.
Instead of having, click here.
Yes.
You know,
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yes. And then your turn after that. I won't forget you.
I'm just thinking about, do you think it's possible to do away with the click here? Do you think people are
Yes.
geared enough to look for the underlying?
I think for the most part, yes. I mean, it depends on your audience, but most audiences now probably don't need click here. We, in our stories, we don't use click here. Yeah. Yes.
To what extent does setting your links to open in the same tab or a new tab affect SEO?
It doesn't affect SEO at all. I know a lot of people do that because they don't want people to leave their site. I think people are going to leave your site either way if that's what they want to do. Like if that happens with me and I'm done with that site, I'll just close the window. But I mean, that's something you'd have to do like a test with to see if it actually does help people stay on your site or not. But yeah, from an SEO perspective, it doesn't matter. Links valued the same way. Yeah. I only have a couple more slides, so I will run through them. So we looked at social media a little bit already, which is just, the more stories are shared, the more they might show up for different people's search results, so you are able to spread awareness that way. So this is an example of a couple of different ways that happens. So I did a search for iPad 2 developers. this is kind of at the bottom of the page. The first result is like the one I showed before, which is that someone shared it. It might have been someone I knew or someone that I knew that knew someone, but for whatever reason, that's showing up algorithmically in the regular web search results. So that's the New York Times live blog in the iPad 2 announcement. The second one, which is results from people in your social circle, it seems the same, but it's actually different. This is one that if you're logged into Google and you're sort of opted into their Google profiles, you might see extra results. So you're going to see your regular web search results, but then they might tack on some results at the end of, hey, here's the people in your social network that are talking about this. So that's just sort of tacked on at the end. So this one is there because it's ranking. So it's that the fact that someone's shared it has caused it to just rank in the results. And then the other one where I think that Nick Bilton shared his own story probably is why that one's showing up. That's sort of a separate thing. So in a way, it doesn't matter from your ASIS perspective because the end result is just that you want stuff shared. It's just that there's actually multiple opportunities where that's going to help you. Yeah.
I thought they had turned off the social circle after they incorporated the social into the regular.
They didn't. I did this search this morning. Yeah.
So the
They may eventually turn it off.
well, for the regular search results, are they pulling that social network data from your Google profile, or is that from the sites that you interact with while you're
So they came out, I'm trying to remember what the specifics are because it wasn't exactly the same as the social circle. There's some other intricacies there. It does try to use your Google profile, but you're able to, I think, opt in but not show your social networks. There's some things there with privacy where you can take advantage of this where you didn't, I think it was before that you had to sort of be public in order to use the social circle stuff. The ranking stuff, you can keep everything private so that no one can go to your profile and see all of your social network stuff, but it'll still be able to be used. But I think it still all mostly comes from your Google profile at this point. And it sort of starts to become exponential where it'll use other people's profiles. Yeah. And then this is just, I thought, another good example of this idea that we can't always expect people to go to our site all the time. And so you want to think about, like, how can you raise awareness? And so I think NPR research does a great job of this, where they realize that for a lot of people, their homepage is now the Twitter page. And so people will go there and then sort of scan it to see the news of the day. So they know that people aren't going to go to their NPR blog every day to see what the new blog post is. But if they can post interesting things, they can get people to subscribe to, say, the Twitter feed. And then occasionally then someone will see a headline that they'll want to click on. What I think they do a good job at is they're not just an RSS feed. So it's not just that you subscribe to the Twitter feed and get a feed of all their posts. They also post other interesting things that aren't just on their blog. So that's why I subscribe, because they post all kinds of interesting things about data and analytics, which I really like. And they also include their own stuff. And so that's just another, way to get that engagement and to get people to see it. It's just, people just aren't going I think the early days of the web, we had like a bookmarked portal page, right? And we had all of our favorite pages and we'd go there and then we'd go to all the sites. And we just don't really do that anymore. And so these are sort of the new ways to just make sure you're getting in front of people. And I think that was all that I had. More questions? And this is my new logo. So just trying it out new. And this is me on Twitter if you want to follow me on Twitter.
One thing going back about tags and stories, so it's
Yeah.
really not worth your while to put tags in, or do they do some good for you?
The keywords tag?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't worry about the keywords meta tag because that's not really used by the search engines. Yeah. Tags that are sort of like you do a blog post, then you have tags like category tags. Those can be useful if you don't overdo it. If you have 100 of them, then it sort of gets diluted. But if you have 4 or 5, because that's also good for navigation, right? Because if someone's interested in that story, I often I'm interested in a story that I read, and I want to see other stories about that. And when they don't have any tags, I get sort of frustrated because I'm not going to search through their site and look for it. So it can be pretty useful for people. Yeah. Yeah.
One more. This came out of what you were talking about in Australia, and it's a big discussion that's going on at my newspaper on the website. And that is the getting people to your website every morning.
Yes.
I just launched a new morning sort of e-newsletter on the blog, or on 2 of the blogs that I do. And there was great debate within the paper whether it was a good idea to have that, or whether you should just break it up into component pieces instead of one long
Mm.
piece. What is the difference between getting something that would optimize on the web or that would draw people through links to you
Mm-hmm.
and building this audience? I mean, how you were saying we should do both. What are the pros and cons of trying to do it one way by getting a loyal audience coming back to you every day versus figuring out how to optimize searches so that people will link to you and they come?
And I don't think you have to make a choice, right? Like in that case, it might make sense to break the things up rather than putting them into one post, because then they could rank separately for each, since they're each about a different thing, and people could link to them, and you could have, say, a Twitter account where each of them gets shared separately. But people who want to engage with you directly and go to the site, you can have them all show up so that when they go to the page, they still see it as if it were one blog post, so that you don't do it where they have to click through to read the whole story, right? Just have it be a full feed and let it show up. And then people who go to it, directly will see the whole thing. So I think you can find ways to do both. Yeah, I mean, you never really want to sacrifice one. I know you can only spend so much time with each thing, but I think in most cases you can find a way to build things in a way that satisfies both, right? Because it's actually the same audience. Right? So it's not that some people search and some people will go to your site. It's really the same audience doing both things. So if you can find a way to really engage them the same way, where it helps both of those things, that's really the ideal way to do it. Yeah. Yes?
You said YouTube is a popular search. Would it make any sense for reporters who writing the story, would it make any sense to, in effect, make a YouTube where you're a video where you're
Yeah.
discussing the story?
Sure.
Doing the same story?
Yeah, so people love video, I have to say. People seem to love it more and more. And it's also interesting, some people like watching a video and some people like reading. So sometimes you'll see it where they'll put the video at the top of the story and then they'll have the article below it, where it's really kind of the same thing, but some people just want to watch the video and some people want to read it. And so you can embed the video in the page as well as have it on your YouTube channel. And then, of course, the YouTube can link back to the actual article. But, I mean, if you have the resources and time to do it, that's great.
Would it be something as literal as the person reading their own story?
I do know some people that do that. You'd want to make it somewhat interesting, put some visuals in there, something like that. But I do know people that actually read their blog posts on video. And some people some people would prefer, it's just like some people would rather watch the news versus read the paper, right? We're all just sort of different. Some people are visual and some people are readers. Yeah.
It would seem to me like you really have to
Yeah.
play it up, though.
You'd want to.
You can't just recite it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could, but.
But it also would be a great way to do like a 2-second summary.
Yeah, you could do an intro. Yeah, if there's any way to have graphics or interview someone. I mean, there's things you could probably think of to do. Yeah. I think we're about out of time, right? Is that right? So thanks you guys for coming, and thanks for all your great questions. I know, it's sad. So search is really just how we navigate the web. So a lot of you may have seen this State of the Media report that came out this week from the Pew Foundation, Knight Foundation, and I'm forgetting the third. Maybe someone here recalls. Anyway, it was a really interesting study, right, that came out about the media and how we interact with the media and how we use it. And there's all kinds of stuff, and it was great. I wrote a story that just talked about parts of it. I just pulled out a few parts. That's my story there. And so, one of the big things that came out of it was now for the first time we read news online more than we do in print. And this is some stats on how we get our news by age group, and I'm sure it's not surprising to any of you, right? The oldest age group, the radio is not in decline, but for the other age groups, if you look at the youngest, the internet, has even surpassed TV, which apparently we all love TV because that's continues to be the most. Now, this is just about how we consume information. And the thing that we're not going to really talk about today, but that is, of course, really important, and that I got into a little bit in the article, is how we consume information is not the same information that we pay for, right? It's still the case, and this is obviously another big issue, is it's still the case that when we pay for news, we pay for print, right? We don't pay for online. And so right now the print is really subsidizing online efforts. And so there's a whole lot of intricacies there, obviously. One of the things that I talk about in the article is that the biggest loss of revenue, of course, with print is with classifieds. And so that doesn't even have to do a lot with the news, right? It has to do with the fact that there's eBay and Craigslist and Monster.com and all these other ways that people look for classified information. But of course, that's a big issue. So here, right now, we'll just talk about sort of awareness and how to get more readers, but understanding that, that's not the whole pie, obviously. But it's interesting stuff. So Hitwise last year said that news sites in particular saw a huge increase in the amount of people that were coming from search. In the book that I wrote, I used a news site as a study, but they didn't want me to say their name. But they're one of the larger news sites in the United States, and so they gave me this stat, which is that a quarter of all the traffic that goes to the site is from search engines with searches that don't include their name, don't include their brand name. And of course, if you look here at the traffic from Facebook versus the search engines, you're seeing that a lot is coming from search. This was another study that came out last year about sort of how we change, or how we've started to change consuming information. Of course, the TV. How many of you watch a lot of TV? I don't watch a lot of TV, but I think a lot of people do.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the National Press Club. I'm Rick Dunham, the Washington Bureau Chief of Houston Chronicle and Hearst newspapers, and the president of the National Press Club's Eric Friedheim National Journalism Library, which is the educational and charitable arm of the National Press Club. And we're thrilled today to have with us Vanessa Fox, who is one of the nation's foremost experts on search engine optimization. Before I turn the microphone over to Vanessa, let me just tell you about a few upcoming programs that we have here. First of all, the April classes that Beth Shankle teaches in the library will be announced very soon, but there's a new one coming up on Google Documents. On May 9th, we have a program celebrating or commemorating the 50th anniversary of the famous Vast Wasteland speech of Newt Minow, former FCC chair. He will be there to talk about what's happened to the vast wasteland over the past 50 years. And he'll also have with him the current FCC chair. The session will be hosted by Frank Sesno, the former CNN Washington bureau chief. Coming up in June, we have the Reporters Boot Camp, which will teach everyone, I hope, how to do your jobs better, how to survive in this economic environment, how to find another job. Roy Peter Clark of Pointer is the keynote presenter, and we'll be announcing other panelists coming up soon. That's going to be an all-day event. And with that, let me introduce Vanessa. She has a long list of credits, and I'll try to boil it down. She previously worked at Google, and for all techies would know, built Webmaster Central on Google. www.google.com/webmasters, which provides tools, information, and community for site owners about how their sites are performing in Google search engine. She also was instrumental in the sitemaps.org alliance, which is an alliance of Google, Yahoo, and Microsoft Live Search. So that's just about all the big names there. A little bit about her. Before then, she started writing technical documentation for developers. She spent a number of years managing feature and user interface development, and she also, from those of us who are reporters, has done a lot of superb writing on technology and on search engine optimization. She uses her talents, writing, speaking, consulting, in a new venture which is called 9 by Blue, And let me pull out a paragraph, which is sort of key to what we all do, from her website. She writes, "Websites aren't built in isolation. They have real business value. Often they are the business. Being found in search engines isn't just something that's nice, it's vital. And search is simply one part of larger marketing development and product initiatives." And all of us in the journalism world know, or those of us who use the web, if people can't find what we did, we didn't really do it. So with that, let me turn the microphone over to Vanessa, and we're very glad to have her here. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. So something else about my background that you may not know. So when I was growing up, I really, really wanted to be a journalist. And I decided that what I really wanted to do was be an international war correspondent for Newsweek magazine, because I don't know why, but that's just what I decided I wanted to do. But I figured it would be hard to get that as an entry-level job. So I thought I would start out smaller. So when I was in high school, I did an internship at my local paper, the Bakersfield Californian. And I worked under the education editor. And so there I found that not all of journalism is like being an international war correspondent for Newsweek magazine. And in fact, what it really was going to school board meetings at like 9 o'clock at night that were really boring, and then writing them up and having the only people who read what you wrote call you the next day, yelling at you because apparently what they said in a public forum wasn't supposed to be quoted in the newspaper. And so that was sort of what I understand journalism to be. So, you know, if you kind of think about that, at least when I think about my experience there, one thing that now that I work in search just keeps coming back to me over and over, which is, you know, we're all, at least I was always sort of taught to write using the, you know, inverted sort of like pyramid style, right? And so you want to put all of your information right at the front. And if we hadn't, like, you've all heard of this inverted pyramid thing? I didn't just make it up, yeah. So say you'd never heard of it, right? And someone came up to you and told you that you should start writing your stories this way. You might say, like, why should I write my story that way? Like, no one will read to the end of my story. We were talking before about people reading to the end of the story. Like, you might say, if I put it all there, like, I need to keep all the good information for the end because I need to make sure that people are going to read to the end, right? And then you might have, say, a discussion where you say, well, we'll do a bunch of data, right? We'll put a bunch of people in a room and we'll give one half of the room, you know, one style of the article and the other half the other style, and we'll see if the people who get the information at the top read to the end. And you could have this debate and you could have it go on and on for a long time, right? And I'm sure that there would actually be pros and cons to both sides. But I think what that discussion fails to think about is this is the other thing that I learned at the paper. Since I was an intern, I was able to go see all the different areas. And one place they had me spend some time was where they pasted up the paper. I'm actually older than I look, so this is how they did the paper. And I was, so, I mean, you have to understand as a 16-year-old girl, and I had a piece of paper that I wrote things on, and then I had to type it up on a typewriter, right, because we didn't have computers or anything. I spent hours and hours on these school board meeting notes. I mean, I spent a lot of time. And I was shocked and appalled that when they pasted the paper and the ad was bigger than the space, they chopped off the bottom of the article, okay? I wanted to cry when I learned this. So this style of putting all of the good information at the top, it actually goes well beyond this idea of like, how are people gonna read it? It actually goes to the way the infrastructure of the paper was laid out. Like, if I put the good information at the end, chances are this ad guy, he doesn't really care about my story, right? He cares about his ad. And so I think that as, you know, obviously things have shifted again. And so the infrastructure of how we provide information to people has shifted again. And so, you know, we always have to think about what is that medium and what are all the different things that keep it in mind. And so this just, you know, like I say, this was such a, you know, like a traumatic experience for me as a high schooler that I've never forgotten it. And so it's one thing that sort of comes back to me again and again. So we'll talk about this a bit more. How many of you spent time being sad about this? Yeah, I'm not the only one. Okay. So today we're going to talk about search. There's obviously a lot of other implications in terms of the way that we've shifted to how we consume information being online, but search is definitely one of them. And I think the reason that search is so important is just that if you think about it, most people use search every day in just about everything that they do, right? Search has become ubiquitous and we don't really think about it. Like, how many of you used a search engine this week? All of us, right? But we forget about that, right? So like a couple weeks ago, I was in Australia talking to a media company that has a lot of print publications that you may have heard of in Australia. And they were talking about how proud they were of their online strategy, and they had these websites, which are awesome, right? I don't want to take anything away from it, but their entire strategy was we need to get people to come to our site as a portal. Like when they think of breaking news, we need them to type in the name of our site into the address bar. And I told them that, I actually told their CEO this, and later I wondered if that was so wise, but I said, when I hear you talk, it sounds to me like you're still, just a print paper and trying to get people to have the paper brought to their door and wondering why, how you can increase the circulation when you think about, oh, now I need to get people to go to the homepage of my website. What you have to think about is you have to think about where people are and what they're doing. And a lot of times when there's like a breaking news information, they're going to do a search. So you have to also think about how can I get in front of them, right, in those ways. And he told me he went home and cried. But then the next day he said that he actually liked the information, so it was all right. But so we all search all the time. Oh, apparently my slide went further. Yeah, so if you look at the types of things that we use search engines for, the one that actually scares me the most is health information. 71% of us start at a major search engine when we're looking for health information. We all know, I think at least those of us in this room, although maybe not most people that search, that the internet actually isn't 100% accurate. So this 71% number is a little bit scary. Search continues to grow, right? As we continue to live our lives more online and really expect to be able to search for anything we want all the time, search grows. So like one thing people ask me a lot is, well, as social media becomes more popular and something we do more and more, does that mean we don't need to think about search anymore because people aren't searching anymore, now they're doing social media? But actually, even as social media increases, search also increases. Like it's just, going more and more. So it's not something that we can forget about just because there's all of these other things that are happening. And this I found, this to me I think is just really illustrates how much we use search. So every year for the Super Bowl, because I'm super geeky, every year for the Super Bowl I watch the ads. How many of you watch the Super Bowl and watch the commercials? Some of you? So I watch the ads, I don't watch the game. I watch the ads and then I look to see what that caused in searcher behavior and how those advertisers do in search. And so not this year, but the year before, the most popular ad was a Dockers ad where, I don't know, you may recall this, there were all these guys who weren't wearing pants walking across a field singing. It was very popular. And I don't know why. And anyway, so if you look at the day of the Super Bowl and you see what people were searching for, the most popular searches were around the Dockers ad, and 2 of the most popular searches were for the URL. So even when people know the domain or know the URL they're typing in, they still use search. Like that's how much we're using search. And in fact, if you look, this was a Hitwise report that just came out this week. These are the top searches this week. The circled ones have to do with the earthquake. All the others are basically the ones that are most popular every single week. Facebook, YouTube, Facebook login, Craigslist, Facebook.com, Yahoo, eBay, www.facebook.com, Google, yahoo.com. We go to Google and search for Google. Just saying. This is your audience, by the way, just pointing that out. So like